Welcome back to Kings of Columbus. Doug Lesmerises flying solo on this one, and we're talking about villains. And here. Now, I'll explain what's going on here. So, little inside information. We've actually already recorded next week's Kings of Columbus. And I will tell you that next week's Kings of Columbus is a discussion during 4th of July week of whether Ohio State could become America's team and enter what I would call the 5th golden age of Ohio State football. So that is maximum positivity, the best that could happen. We're not just talking about like undefeated, could they win the national title this year? We're talking about launching another golden era, okay? So that's way on that end. So on today's show, we are doing villains that could stand in the way of Ohio State winning it all in 2024, because it's not only about you. I like to make it only about me, but football life is not only about you. Context matters. The people around you matter. So we are discussing those other players, coaches, stadiums, situations that could stop Ohio State, even if Ohio State is great. So that's sort of like the other end of like, oh, how does it go wrong? Because when you do this, the middle is where interesting goes to die. So I've always believed you're constantly evaluating the team and the players you cover from like a microscopic angle. You're drilling down, or you're going to 30,000 feet. To just be like, hey, what's going on? In the middle is snooze fest. So we're not clickbait here. I'm going to talk about that. We're going to do Whatcha at the end. I need to talk about that a little bit because I feel possibly I'm falling short here. But we're not like throwing out crazy stuff, but we want to talk from both ends of how well this Ohio State season could go and what maybe could go wrong. Because, hey, I think they'll be pretty good. Hey, I mean, that's all true, but it's not interesting. And so just because something is true doesn't mean you make a show about it. So this is the end of who stands in the way. Okay. So with the help of our tech subscribers, I have come up with the 10 players, coaches, stadiums that could stand in the way for Ohio State. And it's not just people on the regular season schedule, because we're looking big picture. We're thinking about teams they could and will meet in the college football playoff. So we're going to run through those 10. We'll do Whatcha at the end. But to like lay the foundation here, I started covering Ohio State in 2005. I have covered 28 Ohio State losses if you take out 2011. So if you include 2011, it's 35. But 2011 is not real Ohio State football. So to lump that in here, you just kind of throw that one out. And I've espoused this idea on various shows that I have done in the past that a lot of the time when you come across an Ohio State loss, especially if it's a surprising loss, more often than not, there's an NFL guy standing in the way. Maybe you did not know it at the time going into that game, how good that opposing player was, how good he would be in that game, how good he would be the rest of his college football career, how good he would be in the NFL. But looking backward, you're like, oh, yeah, no, I mean, it's kind of a surprise when Ohio State ever loses, but I get it. That guy. So that's kind of what we're looking for here. But the other question that we're asking along the way is, in the context of this college football season, when you look at what's out there, and when Bill and I did a college football tiers show on a recent Kings of the North, we only had 5 teams in the national title contender tier. And that tier to us was, it's for just for this season, that making the playoff isn't enough. There's a playoff contender tier that was the second tier for us. And that's like, hey, you're aiming for the national title, but if you make the playoff and then don't win the national title, you're probably not actually mad. You're not disappointed. We put Notre Dame in there. We put Michigan with all its losses from its coaching staff and its roster. We put Michigan in there. I don't think Michigan's going to be mad if it makes the playoff and doesn't win the national title. We put Penn State in there. But the 5 teams that we put in the national title contender tier that are like, the playoff's not enough. It's Ohio State. It's Oregon. It's Georgia, it's Texas, And we had a debate about it, but we put in Alabama based on that's what Alabama thinks. We're also going to do a show on KOTN about how there's a Saban-sized hole in college football that's going to come down the pike. And I think people are underestimating it. And I think you're already seeing Ohio State start to fill it in some ways with the way they're recruiting in Alabama, with getting Julian Sayin and Caleb Downs from Alabama. Just like somebody is going to ascend into that spot. And to think that Alabama is just going to keep being Alabama is frankly crazy. So when I thought about possible villains for this Ohio State season that aren't on the regular season schedule, I'm not going to pick somebody from LSU. I don't think from Miami. I don't know. So, but it's mostly regular season teams. And then that Texas, Alabama, Georgia group that very well could wind up meeting the Buckeyes somewhere in the playoff on the road to where they want to get. But let's lay groundwork. And so I went through all 28 losses that I've covered other than 2011 and tried to figure out. I didn't write down all the stats. It's a lot of numbers. I'm old. It confuses me. But I revisited those games and I looked at the stats and I went, oh, yeah. Because it is one of those things. Luke Fickell always said this, but I mean, I think you guys think it and say it. I think everybody around Ohio, you remember the losses more than you remember the wins. I have a terrible memory. I think really if I sat down and someone said, name the 28 losses other than 2011 that you've covered out of Ohio State, I think I'd be like, bing, boom, bing, 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 bing. And I'd be able to rattle them off because they stick, because they're rare. And they're often, they're either one of two things. They're either surprising, holy moly, they lost to Iowa, or it's a huge game. That's a very memorable situation. It's like, oh yeah, they lost to Clemson in the semifinal. Oh, okay. Yeah. Like they lost to Vince Young in Texas. Oh yeah. Remember that one? Yeah. It's kind of memorable. So I'm going to run through the 28 losses and give you a real quick brush on the shorthand of why I think Ohio State lost that game and who was it that stood in their way, because that will help us decide how we should think about who maybe will stand in their way in 2024. You ready to do it? I have a notebook. Can I give you a little secret? It's not yet. I'll do it on a Whatcha later in the year. You got to do it like late August, early September. When they have the back to school stuff, after school starts, the stores, like your grocery store that also has school supplies kind of place, right? Like a Meyer kind of place or whatever. They always have extra notebooks and they're like 70% off. So I go and I buy all the notebooks that the school kids didn't buy and I get them for like 60 cents. And then I just have boxes because I like to write stuff down still. If you are a person who wants to write stuff down, buy a year's worth of like college rule notebooks right after school starts. You'll get them for like 80% off. See you at the store. All right, here we go. Who has caused past Ohio State losses? The very first game I ever covered, if you've been listening to me for any length of time, I've told the story. I worked at a newspaper in Wilmington, Delaware. I got the job. The Cleveland Plain Dealer was a little slow on the up. I mean, everybody always is. You think they're going to make a job decision X, and then it takes a couple extra months. So I missed the opener in 2005. I worked in Wilmington, Delaware on Friday, flew to Columbus, Ohio on Saturday morning, covered Ohio State, Texas. Troy Smith, like still half suspended, sharing the job with Justin Zwick versus Vince Young, was the first Ohio State game I ever attended and the first Ohio State game I ever covered. So, and the first Ohio State loss I ever covered. So 2005 Texas, Vince Young, right? So yeah, Ohio State dropped the touchdown pass in the end zone that would have helped them. So some of it was certainly self-inflicted, but the guy, you saw what he did at the end of the 2005 season against USC. He showed it against Ohio State in week 2. Right? So why did they lose that game? Texas, Vince Young. The other loss in 05, it's Penn State, Tamba Hali. This is Larry Johnson, one of his great defensive ends is really getting after Troy Smith, low-scoring game. You take that guy off the field, maybe Ohio State wins that game. So there's a defensive end, not the first, not the last defensive end, that's really going to maybe be a game changer in an Ohio State loss. Tamba Hali, I put him on that list. Now we get to 2006, it's Urban Meyer. They go undefeated through the regular season, lose to Florida in the national title game. Yeah, Ted Ginn Jr. gets hurt in the celebration after the opening kickoff. Yeah, Derek Harvey, I can't remember the other guy's name. The two defensive ends for Florida were tearing Ohio State up, but it was Urban Meyer and his motivation and that he made fake headlines doubting Florida and had them loaded. They were fired up, brother. Great motivational tactics with an underdog team to get them ready for an Ohio State team that was a little fat and happy, right? So I would call that that's Urban Meyer coaching. Yeah, there are good players on that team. Like Chris Leak wasn't the reason that they won 41-14. It was Urban Meyer. So Urban Meyer would be the kind of villain you would be out on the lookout for. Is there an Urban Meyer lurking on this 2024 Ohio State schedule where you may know that head coach is going to have his guys ready for the Buckeyes? 2007, the Illinois loss, big upset. Juice Williams didn't throw for a ton of yards, but threw 4 touchdown passes for Illinois in that game out of nowhere. I don't think anybody was that worried about Juice Williams going into that game, and then he played the game of his life. So Juice Williams beat Ohio State in 2007. 2007 national title game against LSU. Glenn Dorsey is a dominant defensive tackle. Ricky Jean-Francois also has a great game. And the LSU defensive tackles really, I think, cause Ohio State problems. Ohio State still scores, and there's other guys you'd throw in there. LSU is probably just better. But I think I would put the Glenn Dorsey, Ricky Jean-Francois combo on this list. Be on the lookout for interior defensive linemen who can ruin your day. There might be some on this list for 2024. 2008 USC, Mark Sanchez goes crazy. They go out to USC. They lose 35-3. They just get blown off the field. A Beanie Wells injury certainly does not help. They have some offensive line issues. Todd Beckman's not that good. Some self-inflicted, but Mark Sanchez went nuts, and Ray Maliuga and their defense was really good, great too. But I'll put Mark Sanchez on that list. 2008, then they lose to Penn State. This is after Terrell Pryor takes the job. I think that's more self-inflicted. That's they've made a quarterback transition. They have a young quarterback who maybe is thrown into the fire a little bit early. It's a really low-scoring game. Penn State doesn't do much offensively. Their defense is good, but I'll put that a little bit more like a self-inflicted Ohio State loss. 2008 Fiesta Bowl, Colt McCoy throws for 450. So Ohio State comes down to the absolute wire, but they can't stop Colt McCoy. Guess what? Colt McCoy is good. Do you notice some of the names we're talking about here? We're talking about Urban Meyer, one of the great coaches in college football history. We're talking about Glenn Dorsey, Mark Sanchez, Vince Young, Colt McCoy, big-time guys. 2009, they lose at home to USC. It's just weird. It's low-scoring. Matt Barkley's okay. Their defense is okay. But I actually think that was a little bit more of Ohio State just sort of laying an egg. One of the weirder games maybe that I've covered in my time here, just 18-15. It's kind of a weird game. 2009, this is where we really start to get into it. 2009, they go to Purdue. Ryan Kerrigan has 3 sacks. I don't know that people exactly know who Ryan Kerrigan is before that. He winds up being, I think, the 16th pick in the draft for the Washington, then Redskins, now Commanders, later on. Goes crazy. You can't block him. Blows the game up. Prime example, Ryan Kerrigan blows up a game and beats a better Ohio State team. So be on the lookout for edge rushers who can blow up your life. 2010, they go to Wisconsin. What's his name? The guy returns the opening kickoff for Wisconsin. But there's 2 people that I really have on this list. Ohio State has just ascended to number 1. It's the crowd. So you're on the lookout. It's a night game. Wisconsin returns the opening kickoff, and Camp Randall feels like it's coming out of the ground. So are there games? Are there stadiums? Are there going to be moments this season where a stadium could beat the Buckeyes? Some of you suggested some. So let's be on the lookout for that. But also J.J. Watt had 2 sacks in that game. You heard of J.J. Watt? I don't know that we were look out for J.J. Watt going into that game. J.J. Watt was a problem in that game. So it's the crowd and J.J. Watt. 2013, they lose. So 11, we skipped. 12, they're undefeated. 13, they're undefeated into the Big Ten championship game against Michigan State. Connor Cook throws for more than 300. Is Connor Cook a world beater? He has a really good game. It's a lot of self-inflicted there. Plus, Michigan State's defense is pretty good. It's a little more self-inflicted there, and also Michigan State's probably better than we think. But I don't know that Connor Cook rises to the level of J.J. Watt and Ryan Kerrigan. 2013 Clemson, Sammy Watkins goes nuts. Remember him? This is one of these things, again, these big Clemson receivers are an issue. So, and Braxton Miller gets hurt. So self-inflicted, they rip Braxton Miller's shoulder off, which leads to this, which leads to that, which leads to that. But Sammy Watkins was really good. So are we on the lookout for game-changing receivers who can sort of single-handedly take you down? Yeah, I'd be on the lookout for that. So Sammy Watkins in 2013, Clemson. 2014, Virginia Tech, it's Bud Foster and that Bear defense. All the Ohio State coaches after the game were talking about, man, this defensive look that Virginia Tech gave us, we weren't ready for it. So we are definitely on the lookout for coordinators, okay? There are other guys who have come along where it's like they schemed it up and they out-schemed Ohio State. So Bud Foster, Virginia Tech defensive coordinator, is an example of that. 2015, Michigan State, self-inflicted. There's nothing Michigan State did there that the rain. Do you want to put weather in here? Mother Nature? If we want to put Mother Nature on the list, if it doesn't rain that night in Ohio Stadium, does Ohio State beat Michigan State? Maybe. If Ezekiel Elliott isn't battling some health issues, maybe. If they call a better game, if they hadn't been jerking around the quarterback situation all year, yeah. Mostly self-inflicted, though. So there wasn't a Spartan that rose up. 2016 Penn State, Saquon Barkley's pretty darn good. Also self-inflicted. They get the field goal blocked at the end that Penn State runs back for the go-ahead score. Trace McSorley's in there. Joe Moore had the offensive coordinators in there. But the fact that Penn State does have an NFL running back who runs for 100 yards that is sort of the heartbeat of their offense, I think does matter there. I think he averaged 7 yards a carry in that game. But also definitely some self-inflicted stuff. And guess what else? Beaver Stadium at night might be on the list for this year. Beaver Stadium, tough, right? Beaver Stadium, tough. So I think that's a good example of a stadium factoring in as well. 2016 Clemson, it's Deshaun Watson to Mike Williams, big receiver over Denzel Ward. Watson doesn't have a huge game. Malik Hooker has the awesome pick, but also still Deshaun Watson. But the other outcome of that is Ohio State can't throw the ball, they get shut out. So actually that great Ohio State secondary holds up kind of okay against Deshaun Watson and Mike Williams, but it's you got to score more than 0. So there's a lot of self-inflicted in there too. But also it's hey, you lost to Deshaun Watson on his road to the national championship. There's kind of not a lot of shame in that. 2017, Baker Mayfield comes in and plants a flag. Throws for 350, starts his Heisman campaign. They got Baker, brother. I don't know what to tell you. 2017, Iowa. Josh Jackson, 3 picks. Eventual second-round pick as a cornerback, and also the 2 tight ends who were both future first-round picks went nuts. Noah Fant and T.J. Hawkinson. So NFL guys. Nate Stanley threw 5 touchdown passes, but it was really the tight ends against those Ohio State linebackers and Josh Jackson living in J.T. Barrett's head. So that's 3 NFL guys who were all top 50 picks who took it to Ohio State. It's it's Iowa. Ohio State's coming up. Iowa has NFL dudes. Iowa has NFL dudes. I'm doing something. I think we're going to do a show next week on Kings of the North about a final farewell of the Big Ten West. If you just go through, I'm trying to look up all Big Ten guys and all American guys from the 10-year history of the Big Ten West. It's all Iowa. Iowa has good players. Watch out for Iowa this year. If they have a mannequin at offensive coordinator that isn't a negative. Iowa's good. 2018 Purdue is Rondale Moore. Self-inflicted. Didn't cash in the red zone offensively early on Ohio State. And then the defensive issues exposed, but Rondale Moore exposed it. I think 12 catches, 170. Rondale Moore, NFL guy. Rondale Moore did it. 2019 Clemson, Ohio State. Everyone believes they should have cashed in more touchdowns in the red zone early on instead of kicking field goals. But really what happens is, and we all know the Shaun Wade ejection for the targeting, but then Trevor Lawrence runs. And it's Trevor Lawrence's runs for more than 100 yards, I think, in the second half that really starts being a problem for Ohio State. So it's Trevor Lawrence who winds up being the number 1 pick in the draft. Trevor Lawrence rises up. Maybe not throwing the ball, but running the ball in 19. So I put Trevor Lawrence on this list. You're on the lookout for game-changing quarterbacks. Who can take you down as a game-changing quarterback? Is there a Trevor Lawrence in college football this year? No. That's good for Ohio State. I don't see one. Is there Caleb Williams? Is there Bryce Young? Is there Joe Burrow? I don't think there is. That matters. The quarterback villains potentially standing in Ohio State's way are not at the level that we have seen in recent years, in my opinion. 2020, getting to the national championship game, who's standing there? The greatest college football coach of all time, which is the best team ever. I think that was Saban's best team. I'm pretty sure Nick Saban is the greatest coach in college football history. Nick Saban's gone. Is there somebody as good as Nick Saban out there standing in Ohio State's way? You're going to get to a huge game, look across the field, and think, wow, that guy is good at his job. Ohio State does not have the coaching edge in this game. Not because Ryan Day's not good, but because that guy is an all-timer. That guy's a legend. Is that out there? To the Saban level? 2021 Oregon, I think it's Joe Moorhead, the offensive coordinator who had done it at Penn State in 16. He's at Oregon in 2021. They run these wide. They're running wide on everything, right? These crackback blocks. Ohio State's young corners have no idea what they're doing. And Joe Moorhead just keeps doing it again and again and again and again. Now some self-inflicted, CJ Stroud's young. But Joe Moorhead as an offensive coordinator, again, be on the lookout for coordinators. 2021 Michigan. Aiden Hutchinson has a huge game, and you come in knowing that David Ojabo and Aiden Hutchinson are potential problems as rush end guys. So this is like another thing. Keep looking for rush end guys. 2022, 2023 Michigan. So these three Michigan things, right? I think Michigan won, not to rehash everything. I think in 2021, Michigan won. I think in 2022, I think maybe the 2022 Michigan win over Ohio State in Ohio Stadium is the greatest, at least in my head, maybe in yours, that's Connor Stallions. That's the scouting edge they got by what most people believe is breaking the rules, right? We don't have a ruling on that from the NCAA. So we'll throw Connor Stallions in there. And then 2023 is more self-inflicted by Ohio State. They go up there. They're as good as the team that's going to win the national championship. And maybe the quarterback play or just the offensive stuff and the psychological. So there's a lot of stuff here. This is not a huge Michigan discussion. We're going to have Michigan stuff on the list for sure. But I think 21, Michigan beat Ohio State. And then I think 22 and 23 were more in the range of Ohio State beating itself / Michigan maybe doing some things to give themselves an edge. So, but if a Michigan defender has a game and is a presence like Aiden Hutchinson was in 2021, that's going to be an issue for Ohio State. And Michigan has a lot back on the defensive line. So we'll keep that in mind. Back to 2022, Georgia. It's Stetson Bennett leading the game-winning drive. So a veteran quarterback who has that ability. And then it's Kirby Smart being Kirby Smart. He's a tremendous coach. I certainly have criticisms about the way he runs his program or what his program does off the field. On the field, getting his team ready, the guy's elite. And then 2023 Missouri, I don't even think, 2023 Missouri bowl game is sort of like the entire 2011 season. It's was that Ohio State? Does that count? It does count. Marv's gone. The quarterbacks get hurt. Everybody else plays, but Missouri is good. I don't know what that was. They didn't have a quarterback to play, right? They didn't they played with 10 guys. So I'm not going to get bogged down in Missouri. So the bottom line is there are a bunch of familiar names in there. If I am really gonna try to list it, and I did send this to our tech subscribers, 614-662-4509. We're going to get to some tech subscriber input here. But I sent to them, these are the top 10 to me. I didn't put them in order, but the top 10, I just ran through all the options. Top 10 is Vince Young in 05, Urban Meyer in 06, Ryan Kerrigan from Purdue in 09, Camp Randall Stadium going crazy in 2010, Bud Foster, the Virginia Tech defensive coordinator in 14, Baker Mayfield in 17, Josh Jackson, the Iowa DB with 3 picks in 17, Rondale Moore in 18 for Purdue, Trevor Lawrence in 19, and then Nick Saban in 20. So what are we talking about there? We have a head coach, we have a coordinator, we have a couple great quarterbacks. We have 3 great quarterbacks. Is there a Vince Young, Baker Mayfield, Trevor Lawrence on the schedule? That's 3 of the 10 guys. So that's what we're talking about. That's what we're on alert for. That's what we're searching for. We are looking for those type of players Maybe they're obvious. Maybe they're hiding in plain sight. Maybe we have to dig a little deeper for them. So when we come back, we're going to have the list of 10 coaches, players, stadiums this year that maybe have a chance to get in Ohio State's way, the way guys got in the way during these 28 losses over the last, whatever it is, 18 years. It's not a lot of losses. This is, again, I think it's like, hey, Doug's doing a list of losses. I hope it's also a reminder of you can't do this most places, because if you're like, hey, let's talk about all the losses back to 2005, it's like, all right, 81 losses. Let's run through them, right? That's normal. This is not normal. It's not a lot of losses. You can remember them. You should do it. I just draw a line in 05 because that's when I got here. And I try to bone up on Ohio State history, right? And there are a lot of you out there that know, I didn't live through 02. A lot of you did. So you're going to have just a different vibe on that. I can read about it and watch games and go back and write. And I understand Jim Tressel, but I wasn't there in 02. When you're there, it's different. So like I draw the line there. So if you want to draw it off like 05, which isn't also not a terror, it's like sort of the second era of Tressel. Win it in 02, good enough, like close to good enough to win it in 03, 04 reset. Here we go in 05 again. And sit down with your friends and say, okay, no reminders. Let's see if we can list all the losses. I bet you a lot of you could, because they're so rare. When we come back, villains for 2024, next on Kings of Columbus. Doug Lesmerises back on Kings of Columbus. All right, let's get to our list. 10-1. Biggest potential villains for Ohio State season, but I have to throw this one in. I love it when the texters get creative with their input. This is Jeff. Looking at the schedule, I think I found the most likely villain for the 2024 season, the Akron Zips. Dun, dun, dun. Think about it. If there's any doubt about who the starting quarterback is between Will Howard and Devin Brown, and the offense doesn't score 70 on the Zips, the immediate overreaction is going to be what's wrong with the offense. And the season will be an angst fest, worrying if we have the quarterback to win it all. That is some sharp stuff, because it's not necessarily, Akron, of course, it's not beating Ohio State, but can you plant a seed? Because guess what happened in 2015? Northern Illinois and Hawaii planted seeds. Remember when Cardale Jones got benched after 4 series? They got enough in the way. Oh, this is such a good answer. They got enough in the way to cause consternation. Oh, are they going to go to JT? Oh, wait, JT's going to be the red zone quarterback. Oh, wait, they did go to JT. Whereas if Ohio State just would have steamrolled coming off that Virginia Tech win in the opener on the road, if Ohio State just steamrolls and Cardale is like, I got this, that whole season is different. So this is such a smart answer. And I'm going to talk about some big picture things at the end about whether Ohio State can only beat themselves, but this works in a little bit. Alex sent this. Villain, Ohio State message boards with overreactive fans. Perfection is the expectation for those people, and they are completely delusional. As you said, there will be speed bumps and adversity, but we need to trust that the team will grow from them. So now we're talking about, right, an underwhelming win combined with an expectation of perfection. And here's where I think the difference is, right? In 15, coming off the national title, there was absolutely, we were expecting with so much NFL talent back, which is Ohio State's not coming off a national title, but the level of guys who could be in the NFL right now, I think, is similar to 15. So as you are questing perfection, are you doing it just because you have an unreasonably high bar? Or are you doing it because you believe there's a standard that the team must reach by the end of the year in order to beat good opponents and win the national championship? From my perspective as a media member, and listen, like how do I get paid for this? My daughter says all the time, so your job is fake. Blessings. But we don't view it that differently, right? So you and I all watch the same games. We hear the same answers. So I really do not want to hold Ohio State to a perfection standard for the sake of perfection. Because, well, you have Denzel Burke and JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer, and we think CJ Hooks and Sonny Styles are going to be good, and Jordan Hancock's going to have a huge year, and Jeremiah Smith and Quinshon Judkins and Trayvon Henderson, you guys should be awesome. Not for the sake of perfection. But I think you need to be on the lookout because they still play so many games in a year, at least 8 that are like guaranteed, absolute guaranteed wins. That in the course of those games, you're not just looking for a victory. You're looking for a standard, and does it, as you look forward, would this get it done? And we always used to say back then, does this beat Bama? Does this beat Bama? And so I think early in 15, it's like, okay, they're going through this, like, does this beat Bama? Does this Hawaii performance beat Bama? No. So we're not just going to sit and only talk about Ohio State beat Hawaii. We're going to talk about if they look like this, if they play like this, if they do this, is it good enough? Because we think the talent's good enough and we think the coaching's good enough. In 15, we had proof it was good enough in 14, and it's all back. We don't have the exact same, we don't have that proof right now. There's certainly much more questions because these guys haven't gotten it done at the highest level. So I think we have to apply that standard. Man, does that performance, especially in September with this easy schedule, does that beat Georgia? Does that beat Texas? Does that beat Oregon on October 12th in Autzen Stadium? So I think that is reasonable to do. I think we have to do it. But to just be looking for reasons to be like, well, I was a 94, it's a solid A, but I think you guys should be getting an A+. There's no point to that. So if you hear us on the podcast or on Kings of Columbus holding Ohio State to an impossible standard, call us out. Because like what's it in service of? Criticism after victories must be in service of something. And the pursuit of greatness, that's a great thing to serve. But the pursuit of perfection is not, because you don't usually have to be perfect to win it all. You just have to be better than the next guy. So it's not, was that perfect? It's, does that beat Georgia? Does that beat Bama? Does that beat Texas? Does that beat Oregon? And most importantly, does that beat Michigan? What was I saying? I legitimately, we started off before we started the list. This is why I need a co-host. Let's start the list. Number 10, Dylan Raiola from Nebraska. And I put these guys, I lumped these guys at the bottom because we're going to start with 2 could have been Buckeye quarterbacks. And I'll just tell you, number 9 is Quinn Ewers from Texas, but we'll stay on Raiola for now. Raiola never signed with Ohio State. He's going to be the starting quarterback for Nebraska. Bill and I have talked a lot on Kings of the North. Nebraska just has a really easy schedule. It is not impossible that by the time Nebraska gets to Ohio State, that this is an undefeated matchup. And the idea that Dylan Raiola as a true freshman is going to come in and beat Ohio State is crazy. But what if he's Trevor Lawrence? What if he, as a true freshman, is like absolutely ready for this? Because when he initially committed to Ohio State, that's what you were all thinking. That's what I was thinking. It's like, hey, man, Ohio State beat USC for this guy who at least kind of tiptoes around like Patrick Mahomes and is like has off-platform throws and that kind of thing. And by the way, he doesn't have to lead Nebraska to the national championship, but he could get in Ohio State's way. He could do something now. And again, this is the great point by Jeff with the Akron thing. He doesn't have to beat Ohio State, but could he punch holes in this defense that we think has a chance to be the best defense in the country? Can he do things that Quinn Ewers at Texas or Carson Beck at Georgia or Jalen Milroe at Alabama or maybe Dylan Gabriel in maybe a second go round for Ohio State, Oregon would take note of? So this is Nebraska's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8th game, October 26th at Ohio State. Nebraska could be 7-0 going into that game. So it's number 10 on the list. This is not a name that texters mentioned, but there's talent here. And if there is a lightning in a bottle moment or a couple moments where he makes some throws that beat these great Ohio State corners, And they have a couple guys. They have a couple guys at Nebraska, transfer from Wyoming and Texas, who's like a dude. Like, that's why he's 10th. I wanted to throw him in there. I don't think Nebraska's going to come in and beat Ohio State. But could Dylan Raiola make us think that this Ohio State defense is not impenetrable? Maybe. 9 is Quinn Ewers. 9 is Quinn Ewers from Texas. Texas is going to make the playoff. I think Texas might win the SEC. On our latest, we did a playoff pick show on KOTN a couple weeks ago. And on that show, I declared that I have actually decided that of the two monsters, I don't think Bama's going to be a monster this year. Of the two potential SEC monsters, which are Georgia and Texas, I'm actually leaning towards Texas. And so we could get to a situation where Ohio State and Texas are the top 2 seeds, where these are the 2 teams that are on a collision course. And if this happens, there is the idea that Quinn Ewers is a quarterback with NFL ability. He was an incredibly highly rated recruit. He was the number 1 player in his class. And he's going to be in his 3rd year at Texas with like all kinds of experience. And he's just a good player, and they have some weapons, and he has an offensive head coach in Steve Sarkisian. So there's that. And then there's also the fact that he went to Columbus High School, which is what I call his freshman year at Ohio State, when he did nothing. He wore an Ohio State. Now, how many snaps he took as a Buckeye, 12 snaps or something, they will show every one of them if Ohio State and Texas wind up meeting in the playoff. But like, villain origin story, if we're really leaning into the villains part of this, and we put the word on the screen, it's what I called the show. The guy came from Texas to Ohio for a year and then left. Texas was always his dream school. Texas was not like in a good spot when he decided to come to Ohio State. Like, there's a lot of intrigue here. Kyle says it's Quinn Ewers as the villain for 2 reasons. He could just beat us in the playoffs or even in the Natty. If we falter ourselves this year, it will be because of quarterback. And oh, wait, if Quinn didn't transfer, he would be our starter. So yeah, it's Quinn Ewers, even if we don't play Quinn. So this is like, what was the thing? I don't really watch the Wolverine movies, but didn't they have a movie where like Wolverine lived in the desert, and it was the Wolverine origin story? We all love origin stories. So this is the Quinn Ewers origin story, which I would call kombucha, right? That was the drink he endorsed because high school athletes in Texas couldn't get NIL. So he went to college and then got NIL to endorse kombucha. Kombucha, the Quinn Ewers origin story. A narrative podcast from Kings of Columbus. 11-part narrative podcast. Part 1, Corey Dennis. Corey, hey, Corey. Doug Lesmerises, how's it going, bro? You want to do like a 90-minute interview about how Quinn Ewers came and left? No? All right, good luck. This is another one about Quinn Ewers. TF sent this in. Probably should have Quinn Ewers on a list in a potential quarterfinal or semifinal, especially with the OSU ties. But like this quarterback discussion, he mentions Carson Beck has to be high on this list, the Georgia quarterback. Does it have to be an opposing player? I think our championship aspirations fall solely in the hands of our quarterback production. So with that said, Will Howard. So again, the most interesting part of this is like, if you want to tie the current Ohio State quarterback production situation, and Devin Brown wound up committing to Ohio State because Quinn Ewers was out the door, to Quinn Ewers. Now, just like all of this shaking out with CJ Stroud here, and Quinn Ewers wouldn't have played as early as at Ohio State as he would have at Texas. But if you could have kept him around somehow, and he agreed to sit, and then he beats out McCord last year, and now he stays, and now Quinn Ewers is in year 2 of being the starting quarterback at Ohio State. With the way things went with him reclassifying and coming early and like all the NIL stuff, it just hit at the exact wrong time for Ohio State there. Like the NIL explosion and then the fact that Texas got its stuff together sort of created this. But I don't think it's an impossible world where that's actually what happens, that Quinn Ewers reclassifies, is here in 21 and 22 as a backup to CJ Stroud, like biding his time. Like, you know what? Like Arch Manning is biding his time behind Quinn Ewers right now, getting ready to sit for year 2 at Texas. Quinn Ewers sits for 2, plays for 2. And then what does Quinn Ewers do instead of Kyle McCord last year? And what would he be doing this year? Kombucha. I'd watch. I kind of want to do it now. I kind of want. It's probably not a movie, but it might be a narrative podcast. We might have to get this ready. What if Ohio State plays Texas? Tom Rinaldi's going to do it. Soft music, soft lights. Quinn Ewers loved kombucha, and kombucha loved Quinn Ewers. All right, that's number 9. What's number 8, Mike? What's number 8 on our list? Oh, it's Sharon Moore. It's not the only Michigan person on this list. And this is the Bo Schembechler theory, that Ohio State wins the national title in 1968. And here comes Bo Schembechler in 1969. And Michigan beats undefeated Ohio State. And the 10-year war is off and running. And so, like, the only real comparison there is, could a first-year Michigan coach beat a great Ohio State team? So the fact that Sharon Moore beat Ohio State last year, that he got all this experience, that I think there is a divide and a debate around Sharon Moore and how good he's going to be, how much of a drop-off Michigan will suffer. Certainly the identity of the program is going to stay the same. They're getting a little bit going in recruiting. They got a Florida quarterback. They won in 26 class, they got a top 100 safety out of DC. And this would be more of a look back one, just like we're looking back on Ryan Kerrigan and JJ Watt and guys like that. And Urban Meyer, frankly, we're looking back on Urban Meyer now. Urban Meyer was great at Bowling Green, and Urban Meyer was great at Utah. I don't know if you knew for sure that in year 2 at Florida, Urban Meyer was going to take down the undefeated number 1 team. That like, oh, wait, no, this guy's not just good. He's all time. I'm not saying Sharon Moore is Urban Meyer, but if Michigan beats Ohio State, and then we look and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe Ohio State lost 4 years in a row. Harbaugh left. This should have been their opportunity. And then 10 years from now, we're looking back and Sharon Moore has 2 national titles and is generally viewed as one of the 3 best head coaches in college football. It's like, oh yeah, no, that was kind of like his debut. Remember how he beat Ohio State in the year he was the fill-in, and then he was the real head coach the next year and he beat him again? Wow, how did he do that? Because he's a great all-time coach. So that's why I put him on the list. I'm not saying that he is. I'm saying we're looking in the weeds for villains. And so if this is like the idea that Sharon Moore just keeps in place what Michigan has done successfully against Ohio State. And if that happens, he's a villain because maybe Michigan makes it 4 in a row. All right, number 7, I think, is tied to number 6. We're doing 2 Penn State things here back to back. Number 7 is Andy Kotelnicki, the new offensive coordinator there. And number 6 is Beaver Stadium. So we'll stay on Kotelnicki first. This is the Joe Moorhead argument that since Joe Moorhead left, James Franklin has not had a great offensive coordinator. And so there's sort of a steadiness to the Penn State defense, and we have a texter comment on that that's really smart. But I think you believe in the Penn State defense. You have huge questions in the Penn State offense. So you could put Drew Aller here. You could put their receivers here. But it's, can this coach elevate this offense? Because if this offense is really good, and now you're pairing it with a really good defense, now you have something. And I don't think it's James Franklin. Now, what James Franklin has to do is like let Andy Kotelnicki, who was the offensive coordinator at Kansas the last couple of years, do his thing. He has to get hands off and turn this over. But they've really missed Joe Moorhead. And as you guys know, like you go back through the annals of this, and Ryan Day turned down the Mississippi State head coaching job after 17, right? Because that's how he got a bump to be a $1 million a year coordinator. And Joe Moorhead took it. So Joe Moorhead takes that job, is not a cultural fit at Mississippi State, flames out, winds up as the Oregon offensive coordinator, and now is goes to the MAC, right? So like they've been looking for somebody at that level. And like we just like the Andy Kotelnicki hire. By the I knew this. And like I didn't mention the thing. He's a head coach at Akron. So he's going to be the head coach in the opener. The head coach when Ohio State like beats up Akron is gonna be the guy who has beaten Ohio State twice as an offensive coordinator in recent times. At Penn State in 2016 and at Oregon in 2021. And that's who Ohio State opens with. Way to be on the ball, Doug. If you were yelling Joe Moorhead at me during the Akron conversation 18 minutes ago, gold star. Anyway, if Penn State elevates its offense, think about that Penn State offense in Ohio Stadium last year. Like it did nothing. And then they got down and they finally let Drew Aller throw it and they moved the ball a little bit. Now Ohio State's like in a prevent defense. It's different, but like there was a non-functional offense last year. So they've got to improve their receiver play. Julian Fleming's there, but they've got to open it up a little bit. They've got to let Drew Aller try to make some plays. They've got to scheme some guys open. So I think Penn State's built this program under James Franklin on its defense, and they've missed Joe Moorhead since he left. So a new great offensive coordinator will put him on the Moorhead list. Like the Moorhead position. Can Andy Kotelnicki be Joe Moorhead? Next, number 6 is Beaver Stadium. So this is like, I had Camp Randall on the list in 2010. We've seen Beaver Stadium do this, right? The double overtime game, right, in 14, right? Beaver Stadium's nuts. So here's the thing. It's probably not going to be a night game. So it hasn't been announced. It's not official. But just with the way like the draft of Big Ten games, what we know so far, it's probably not going to be a night game, but it maybe still could be. It's Ohio State at Penn State on November 2nd. And if it's a night game, it could be a thing. If it's a day game, they still might do a whiteout. If it's like a big noon game, they still could do a whiteout for that, but it's not the same. And listen, I subscribe to the idea that I like Fox doing big noon. I think important games in the afternoon on a Saturday are good for college football. I don't think you have to definitively say that big game equals prime time and we're going to play at night. But whiteouts at night at Beaver Stadium are crazy. It's like a gladiator pit. And so if you get into that world, is how Ohio State lost in 2016 in that environment. If this winds up a night game, I think it ratchets up the danger zone for Ohio State. I don't think it will be, though. But Beaver Stadium is still wild. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. I know like the video game ratings of stadiums are out. The video game ratings of everything are out. Like, I don't know. Let's just rate it ourselves. Beaver Stadium's wild, man. So November 2nd at Penn State, time TBA. It's not the only stadium worth talking about on this list, but I think we did have to talk about it. And I put it on here because we've lived it, right? There's going to be an Oregon discussion in Autzen Stadium in a little bit. Like, I haven't been there. Most of you probably haven't been there. I think a decent chunk of you have probably been to Beaver Stadium. So we just don't know it yet. So the other thing about Penn State, I do want to mention this. Doug S. said in, I think the main villain this year could be Abdul Carter. That's a former linebacker at Penn State who's being moved to rush end. He has the game-changing ability, and now from a pass rushing perspective, he could change a game. The only question would be Drew Aller and the Penn State offense. Do they have enough of that to make a difference? Probably not, but you never know. So Chop Robinson, was a guy who was like kind of on last year's list for this as potential villains. He got hurt early in the Ohio State game, wound up being a high NFL draft pick. But I have seen Adofe Owe, Jason Owe, back when he played at Penn State, was like a big time dude. I feel like there have been some Penn State pass rushers that have come through that I have been on alert for, and like Ohio State's kind of handled them. So Bill has said he said this on KOTN, he thinks Abdul Carter is going to lead the nation in sacks. So if that's that reality, he could then enter the Ryan Kerrigan, J.J. Watt, Tom Bahali world of like making Ohio State's life miserable, Aiden Hutchinson, and like blowing up the offense. And then you can't do what you want to do. So he's worth talking about. He didn't make my list, but it's possible that he elevates beyond what some of these like very good Penn State pass rushers who have great PFF stats, who are high NFL draft picks, but just have not been as impactful against Ohio State. But Abdul Carter's a really smart name. I'm glad somebody threw him out there. All right. Who is next on the list? This one, I think the texters actually are better on this than my answer, which is Phil Parker, the defensive coordinator at Iowa. Phil Parker's awesome. He's one of the best defensive coordinators in the country. Iowa has a ton back on defense. They lost Cooper DeJean. They otherwise basically have everybody back. Sebastian Castro is a top corner. Xavier Wampa is a safety that Ohio State wanted once upon a time. They're really good on the back end. Jay Higgins is going to be one of the best linebackers in the Big Ten. They're good up front. So could they come into Ohio Stadium on October 5th and cause problems for this Ohio State offense with Phil Parker dialing it up? I think they could. I also think they could supply a blueprint. Right? So then this is the idea of, okay, maybe Iowa. I think Iowa is in the playoff conversation because if their offense is functional, I think their defense is good enough to carry them. It's just not good enough to carry like an offense that's the 100th best in the country. But if Iowa's offense, now that Brian Ferentz has gone, be the 50th best in the country, then this defense might be good enough to carry it. Iowa's going to have a great defense. Penn State's going to have a great defense. Ohio State's going to have a great defense. I think Ohio State will be the best of those, but I think Michigan and Iowa might be close. So could Phil Parker dial it up? This is the Bud Foster conversation on the defensive side of the ball. Could Phil Parker have a plan? He could. And he could do something early. This is pretty early. For Ohio State, this is 1, 2, 3, 4. This is game 5. So if there's any flux still at quarterback, Ohio State could come out of game 5 thinking like, oh man, I don't know. If the Iowa defense gives them real problems. Phil Parker's good. So that's why I put Phil Parker on the list. But someone, a texter sent in alternate Iowa villains that are really good. This is Michael. The Iowa game a week before Oregon scares me a little. And so this again is like, I don't really like the trap game theory, but this is Iowa sitting here October 5th. The trip to Oregon is October 12th. The Iowa game a week before Oregon scares me a little. It's great that it's at home, but if they can stop the Buckeyes offense early and gain some momentum, it could be more interesting than it should be. If I had to pick a villain for that game, I would either say Luke Lachey coming back home and scoring multiple touchdowns, or the carcass that is Cade McNamara beating his old rival. So the two here are Luke Lachey, who is a great tight end, the latest. He got hurt last year, but he's next in this litany of great Iowa tight ends. He's Jim Lachey's kid. And Ohio State didn't take him out of high school. I've heard that like at times Ohio State was potentially interested in seeing if he would want to come to Ohio State as a transfer. He stayed at Iowa. He stayed for this year. And he has a Colston Loveland, I think at Michigan is going to be the best tight end in the country. Luke Lachey is going to be in the conversation. Luke Lachey, there's some really good tight ends in the North. Brant Keithy at Utah. We've talked about this on KOTN. Luke Lachey is right there. So when you think that Noah Fant and TJ Hawkinson, when Ohio State lost to Iowa in 2017, each had 2 touchdown catches, like, okay, this is that formula. And then Cade McNamara, who was the quarterback for Michigan in 2021, coming, I know how to beat Ohio State. He's coming off ACL surgery from last year. They think he'll be healthy for this year, but like that 1-2 combo of former Michigan quarterback, son of an Ohio State legend, teaming up to come into Ohio Stadium and shock the Buckeyes. And if not shock the Buckeyes, scare the Buckeyes. Good origin story. Right? So that was really smart. Really smart to bring up Lachey and McNamara, even though I went to the defensive side of the ball because, like, frankly, I was just a little bit better at defense. All right, number 4 on our list of potential 2024 villains. I went Jalen Milroe, the Alabama quarterback, just because I did sort of want to throw up another like out there quarterback in there. And I have real questions about how good Alabama is going to be. Kalen DeBoer knows how to coach offense, though. And so Jalen Milroe really showed flashes last year, bailed them out, right? Miracle throw in the Auburn game, right? The Auburn game. Great runner. I think at times a good passer. And if he elevates with an offensive head coach, I just wanted to throw him in there because I'm just not a huge Carson Beck guy. I will tell you right now, Carson Beck's not on my list. the Georgia quarterback who a lot of people see as A, the Heisman favorite, and B, maybe the favorite to be the number one pick in the next NFL draft. I'm not all the way there on him. So then we are in a Dylan Gabriel at Oregon, Quinn Ewers at Texas conversation. But like true upside, I think Milroe might be there if he takes another step. And maybe he would be the greatest beneficiary of Kalen DeBoer taking over at Alabama. So in 2020, when Ohio State had played Alabama, they were playing a guy who was going to be a first-round NFL draft pick in Mac Jones, who had a lot of great weapons around him. In 2014, they hit Alabama. That was Blake Sims was probably the worst quarterback Alabama put out there in the Saban era. John Parker Wilson early, right? Was the first 2 Saban years. But I think that was probably their worst quarterback. And so as good as Bama was and as great of an Ohio State win that was and getting over the top against Bama was a huge thing. Like that was not a quarterback who scared you. The guy started his career on the defensive side of the ball. So if Ohio State comes across Bama, and I think it maybe would have a chance to be more in a quarter than it would be in a semi or a national title game. Like the idea that Ohio State's the 1 and Bama's the 8. I think that's got to be out there, that Ohio State's the 2 and Bama's the 7. That's possible. And then it's this guy. So I think he at the very least could make you nervous. And it's one of those things when you have this kind of running ability and it's like, okay, it's just with everything. You just don't. It's like it's the way Trevor Lawrence ran. Like Ohio State thought they kind of handled Trevor Lawrence from a passing standpoint in 2019, and then it ran all over him. So could Jalen Milroe do that? Run all over Ohio State. So I wanted to put him on the list. He's kind of the stand-in for random, talented quarterback on the horizon that would scare you. Jalen Milroe at 4. All right, this is down and dirty now. Let's get to the real stuff. Number 3. 2 Michigan defenders. One is Will Johnson, who might be the best cornerback in the country, and one is Mason Graham, who might be the best defensive tackle in the country. And they both might wind up being top 5 NFL draft picks. And so it's that combination. This Michigan defense played so many guys last year. They played legitimately 20 guys that even though they lost a lot, they have a lot back. They have a lot of guys back with experience. They added a really good linebacker from Maryland as a transfer. They have a Nebraska transfer at linebacker who was their 3rd backer last year, who's going to start this year. They added some guys. They were looking for sort of like a second corner opposite Will Johnson in the portal. They added 3 different guys who could be that answer. They lost Rod Moore at safety to a season-ending injury, which is terrible news for them. But they have dudes. And so this combination of a defensive tackle and a great corner, and if you are uncertain, if Ohio State is still getting good but not great quarterback play by the 12th game of the regular season, Mason Graham and Will Johnson have a chance to make life difficult. This is Andrew. I hate to say it, but my concern would be Michigan's inside defensive line just going off and completely disrupting our new center and quarterback. So, if you want to pair it up with that, and there we have someone else bringing that up later on, where is some uncertainty with Ohio State? It's okay, Donovan Jackson at left guard, been around the block, 3rd-year starter, very talented. You feel okay about. Seth McLaughlin at center as the Alabama transfer. You don't know who the right guard is and the quarterback. This is potentially strength with Mason Graham and the other inside guys at Michigan going at not a vulnerability, but a question mark for Ohio State. So I thought that mattered. John says the team that threatens Ohio State above anyone else is Michigan. Why? Because Michigan has beaten us 3 times in a row. It doesn't matter who they lost after last season. Beating Ohio State is now firmly in the culture. It's in their water. I am reminded of the superior teams John Cooper presented to Michigan, and it didn't matter. So that idea, that's actually probably, I should have read that with Sherrod Moore. That's just Michigan's, it's in the culture of Michigan now to beat Ohio State. I think that's true. It doesn't mean they're going to do it 4 times in a row, but I do think losing to Ohio State and Ohio State beating Michigan was in those 2 cultures prior to this 3-game run. And I think it was mostly talent, but I think it was part of what held Michigan back. from beating Ohio State for a while. So I think this is a good point, but it's not the best Michigan villain because this is the best Michigan villain that somebody sent in. It was JS. Donovan Edwards, Tony Alford. Edwards has a big game versus the Buckeyes in an upset Michigan win and does a post-game interview on the field with his arm around the former Buckeye running backs coach. Alford ends the interview with a "Go Blue." So Tony Alford recruited Donovan Edwards out of high school. He takes TreVeyon Henderson at Ohio State instead. Takes Evan Pryor. Donovan Edwards goes to Michigan. Now, Alford is paired with Edwards. If we're talking like storyline villains, that might be the best storyline villain. Better than Dylan Raiola, better than Quinn Ewers. So, that's just an elite text. 614-662-4509. You can sign up for text, get a 2-week free trial. It's like $6 a month after that. It's not quite as popping right now. We're sort of out of the recruiting camps and preseason hasn't started, but end of July is in a month, we'll be at Big Ten Media Days. That's a good time. So you can do it whenever. And we have a lot of people who stick around. We lose some people in the summer. I'm not going to lie to you. We don't have as many tech subscribers during the summer as we do during the middle of the season, but we have most of them. So if you like Ohio State football year round, and if you're watching and listening to this, I know you do, then you could try the text. Keeps Ohio State in your phone, in your life. Ooh, what those guys had to say? 614-662-4509. Last thing about Michigan, number one possible villain. This is from Matt. The game psychology, which is really smart, which really leads us back to Ohio State beating itself, right? What's the villain? Right here in Ohio State's own mind, getting over the hump against the Wolverines. All right, Will Johnson and Mason Graham, two great defenders for Michigan. Do not underestimate the Michigan defense. That's number 3 on our list. Number 2 on our list, I put the Oregon offensive tackles. I still think might be Texas, might be LSU, but I think in the running, Oregon having the best offensive tackle combo in the country. Josh Connerly was a huge recruit out of Southern California. Johnny Cornelius was a transfer they got last season. They're both back as returning starters. And this is why I picked these two guys for Oregon, because again, this is not an Ohio State team with glaring weaknesses, maybe question marks at quarterback and on the offensive line, but not glaring weaknesses. But you think about their strengths. If the world believes that JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer are loaded up for a great year getting after the passer and being disruptive, and that this secondary is loaded up to shut down receivers. If this is the best tackle combo that Ohio State's going to face, again, maybe until they would get to Texas in a playoff situation, if these guys handle Sawyer and JT, now what? Now there's more time to throw. Now they're scheming it up. Oregon is going to put 3 pretty good receivers out there. We're going to talk about one of them in a second. That's why I put this here, because otherwise you think this Ohio State defensive line is going to cause a lot of problems. But if Oregon can hold them off, what does that do? Now, I don't think it's one of those where it's a blueprint for anybody else, because it's get 2 NFL tackles. It's okay, well, great. Good luck. Did you see any? Everyone's looking for tackles in the portal. Ohio State was, and you can't find them. So this was a huge get when they got Cornelius last year. It was a huge get in the portal. Can you imagine if he came to Ohio State? So that's why I put these 2 offensive tackles as the Oregon guys. There's some other Oregon candidates here. Clayton said Evan Stewart, which is really interesting. He's a former 5-star receiver, was one of the guys that went to Texas A&M when Texas A&M was getting a bunch of 5-stars. He's now at Oregon. He will be one of their 3 starters. He's a big play guy. He showed it in the spring game. He's kind of like Ohio State receivers. And so Tez Johnson is probably going to be Oregon's leading receiver. He's the guy who's really good friends with Bo Nix. Bo Nix is gone. He's back. But Evan Stewart is the new addition. So they lost Troy Franklin. I think it was a 3rd-round pick. Also got picked by Denver. Went with Bo Nix in the NFL. But they lose their number 1 receiver, but they're not going to really have a drop-off at receiver, in part because they have some guys back, but in part because they added Evan Stewart. So could Evan Stewart be the most naturally talented receiver on the schedule, on the regular season schedule? He probably is. So I thought that was a really good suggestion. This is another really good one from Kyle. Possible villains. Honestly, it has to be either Jamari Caldwell or Mateo Uyunglele. These are defensive linemen at Oregon. The Buckeyes are going into Oregon this year, and this game would be the first big test for our offensive line, which I believe is going to be one of the weak points for us. Hostile crowd with those two players could be a mean recipe of disaster for our offensive line. There are villains to watch. Go Bucks. So I think I like Kyle's answer there. And I'll throw in Derek Harmon, who was the defensive tackle transfer from Michigan State that took a little peek at Ohio State and wound up at Oregon. So it's going to be Harmon and Caldwell, who's a transfer from Houston, inside. Uyunglele is going to be one of the guys outside. But he's kind of a big body guy. Again, DJ's younger brother. Ohio State recruited him as well. So the idea of so Mason Graham's going to be the best defensive lineman that Ohio State faces this year. Abdul Carter's in that conversation. They might be individually better than anybody Oregon has, but Oregon's first, and Oregon might have the best group. So that test for the offensive line in mid-October on the road, I think, is a really smart answer. So I went offensive line, but to talk about Oregon's defensive line matters as well. This is a longer answer from Cam. Oregon is the biggest team to threaten Ohio State this year, but not only this year, but they stand to threaten the status of the program as a whole. There's a bit of new guard in college football right now with the resurgence of Texas, Oregon, et cetera, and the perceived decline of Bama, Clemson, et cetera, and it sets up well for Ohio State to take a strong hold at the top of college football. But a regular season loss and a potential Big Ten championship loss, again to Oregon, might be the worst possible scenario for Ohio State. Ryan Day has already lost to Oregon in his tenure, a game many thought Ohio State should have won. Ryan Day has largely been criticized for not being able to win the big one. This would be two instances of losing the big one in the same season to the same team. How could it get worse? Oregon is in the Big Ten now and should be viewed as a conference rival. This is really interesting from Cam. We got into this a decent amount when earlier this summer, we did an Ohio State versus Michigan show here on Kings of Columbus. We did Ohio State versus Georgia, and we did Ohio State versus Oregon. So if you missed the Ohio State versus Oregon show and Cam's text got you thinking, there is a lot at stake this year, and Oregon's not going away, and this is the new rival, right? Michigan's not going away. This is not one of those where I wrote a whole story at cleveland.com back in the day when Michigan was bad and Michigan State was good. And should Ohio State not be using green pens in the Woody instead of worrying about blue pens? Because is Michigan State actually more of a rival right now for Ohio State? Because Michigan State had beaten them in 13. Michigan State beat them in 15. Michigan State was a real thorn in the side while Rich Rod and Brady Hoke were tripping over their own feet and Ohio State was winning 10 straight, right? So that idea, I don't think Michigan's going away, and I don't think Oregon's going to usurp anything that Michigan does, but add it to the list. And it's such a different type of rival. It's on the other side of the country. It's all new. Michigan is not all tradition, but Michigan's all about tradition. And Oregon's all about razzmatazz. We can cut that. Please cut off the part where I said razzmatazz and snap my finger. That was insane. So I like the idea that Cam is putting forth here that Oregon and Ohio State are establishing something this year. And I've said it a million times. I think it's possible Oregon and Ohio State play 3 times this year: regular season, Big Ten championship, and then the playoff. So we could get real hot real fast on a brand new rivalry. Just like I think we could get real hot real fast with Bama, Texas as a real, new, real college football rivalry because they laid groundwork already. They played the last 2 years. Texas beat them last year and almost beat them the year before, or Georgia, Texas. So this is the new world of college football, new teams joining big time conferences, new rivalries are going to develop. We're losing some. I hope we never lose Oregon, Oregon State. I hope we never lose Oregon, Washington. They came to the Big Ten together. We won't. I hope we don't lose Texas, Oklahoma. I hope we get Texas A&M back. We need those rivalries, but also there's going to be new rivalries that develop. And just like Ohio State had a rivalry there, a real rivalry there with Clemson for an 8-year period, Oregon can be like that, but better because it is in the conference, even though they're not going to play every year. So I like that big picture look about Oregon as a potential villain, not just now, but also in the future. So let's go to number 1, and it's Kirby Smart. He's not Nick Saban. And as I said, next week, can Ohio State be America's team? Is Ohio State entering a golden age? Bo Bishop is my my co-host on that one from 97.1 The Fan in Columbus. Love talking big picture ideas with Bo. So one of the things we got in there a little bit on there is like that. I think we can just assume the next Saban is coming along. And a lot of people, me included at times, have just said like, okay, like Georgia's taking over where Alabama left off. That's selling Nick Saban short. And we're going to do a show later on KOTN about the idea of the Saban hole in college football. I'm going to start pulling back from the idea of saying like Kirby Smart is the next Nick Saban. I don't want to say that anymore. But I do think Kirby Smart's a great coach. I think he is a great coach in getting his teams ready to play at a high level. And I think he is a great in-game coach. And like, I thought we learned a lot from an Ohio State standpoint about Kirby Smart from that semifinal. So just like the timeout, as the head coach notices something is off in a punt situation and calls a timeout right before Ohio State's going to run a fake. Like that, it's like that kind of thing. So I think Georgia is overrated coming into this year. I think Carson Beck is not going to be as good as people think he's going to be. I think Georgia had an all-time defense in 21 when they won it and really had a better offense than people understood in 2022 when they won it. And I think their offense is not as good as 22 and their defense is not as good as 21. I think last year they skated on an easy schedule and then lost the game they couldn't lose to Alabama and missed the playoff. So I think like the aura around Georgia, and the thing I'm pushing back most on with my Georgia discussions this year are the idea that like pencil Georgia in, it's Georgia versus the world. It's not. Georgia's good. I don't think Georgia's a step above anybody right now. And I think if you really want to get down to like details about this last 3-year run, you know, the Ohio State game's a coin flip. They lose to Alabama in an SEC championship game and then come back and beat them in the national title when Bama's super hurt. Their schedule is not that tough. They had but they're playing Texas this year. They're playing Bama this year. They're playing Clemson this year. They're playing Tennessee this year. Like there are actual losses out there for Georgia this year. So I want to say like I'm underrating Georgia this year compared to the world, but I'm still putting Kirby Smart number one on this list of standing in the way. Cause I think if I'm wrong, if I'm wrong, never has happened. If I'm wrong and Georgia is what everybody else thinks they're going to be, then the idea that Kirby Smart's standing there in the national title game is like really possible. Jeff says the SEC is always a specter. I hate losing to them. The worst part of the Mizzou loss in the bowl game last year was that it was to another SEC team. I need to beat the SEC 40 to 55% of the time, especially when favored. So like this is part of it too, that hating the SEC and they're like standing, that it would be the SEC, like the new world of the SEC, that if we get this Ohio State against an SEC team, if we get Big Ten SEC in the national championship game, it will really be the final stamp of the new world that we think it's breaking down. You know, it could be an ACC team could get there, Big 12 team could get there, but the playoff, the 12 spots are going to be taken up by 8 to 9 of the 12 spots are going to be SEC and Big Ten teams. And then to have those two best, like that's the future of the sport as it stands right now. So if we get that, and like who represents right now the biggest future of the sport, it was Bama and Michigan last year, but they both lost their head coaches. So it's Georgia and Ohio State. So like if we get to this point, I think Kirby Smart's a good coach. I think Kirby Smart's an excellent coach. I think if you assume he's the next Nick Saban, that's a bad assumption. And I think if you assume that Georgia is a cut above everybody else, I think that's a bad assumption. And I think a lot of people in college football make both of those assumptions. So that's why I then, in comparison, am lower on Georgia than a lot of other people. Jason made this awesome point. Playing Georgia in Atlanta for the championship would be the ultimate challenge. Jason listed a couple other things, but that's what really caught my eye because I had not completely processed that. The national championship game is on January 20th in Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, which is A, Georgia's backyard, and which is B, for Ohio State, the scene of the crime, where Ohio State lost to Georgia before. So if that's what we get, you get not only Georgia and that team and that talent and that roster and that coach, but you get them back where Ohio State was a missed field goal and bad luck and injuries away from beating Georgia before 2 years ago. And it's practically a home game for Georgia. That really ramps it up. So now you want to add the South, the stadium, the field, the memories, the ghosts. You want to put the ghosts of Mercedes-Benz Stadium on this list? You could put that on your villain list. Oh, Ghost is a good villain, like in Scooby-Doo. Oh, ghosts are scary. Love it. So I think Georgia has to be number one on this list, even though on the latest KOTN, I picked Georgia to miss the playoff. I don't think these two things are mutually exclusive, because like Georgia missing the playoff is kind of like my wild pick of like, hey, I think they lose at Bama. I think they're at Bama and at Texas. I think they lose at both of those. They lose one other game. A bunch of other SEC teams are ahead of them. What if they're the fifth best team in the SEC and they have 3 losses? They're going to get in just because they're Georgia? Like, that's the scenario I'm painting. But I'm also acknowledging that like that very likely could be wrong. And the consensus is that Georgia's going to be there and that Kirby Smart's the best coach in college football. So that's why I have Kirby number one here. That's my list. Couple other people with really good stuff. Chris, the villain is Quinn Ewers in the playoff, ripping the heart out of his former team in the semifinal game, a la Trevor Lawrence in 2019. Really good. The easy pick is a rabid environment out in Eugene that causes issues for an unproven starting quarterback. So like doubling down on that idea of Quinn Ewers, and like, could Oregon be potentially like a super tough trip? I think Beaver Stadium is still the toughest. The video game stadium rankings came out, but I saw CFB numbers, which is like a good site for college football numbers. I saw that they did a chart since 2019. It was based on home games and what the betting line was for your home games and what the final score was of your home games, and how much better or worse you were compared to the betting line at home, which I think is a decent way to do it, because it's like the perception of how good you are at home versus the reality of how good you are at home. And that top 25 list of best home stadiums that the video game people put out, by the CFB numbers, number one was Utah, 6.0. They were 6 points better in reality versus the spread at home. Utah was 1, LSU was 2 at 5.1, Oregon was 3 at 4.9, Notre Dame 4 at 4.8, Ohio Stadium 5th at 3.9. So the point is here, Oregon, Autzen Stadium, they're almost 5 points better than the spread at home since 2019. So we'll see how crazy Autzen Stadium is, but I like wanted to bring that up. So that's my list of 10. But actually is the only thing standing in Ohio State's way, Ohio State itself. Like I said to our texters, you're allowed to answer that, because there are some things like in 2015, was it really that somebody beat Ohio State, or was it that Ohio State beat itself? In one or two of these Michigan games, and Connor Stallions is part of it, but like, did Ohio State beat itself? I left that answer out there. There still were a lot of good answers, as you've heard, about real people standing in Ohio State's way. But there were also some people who said, like Steve said, I believe Ohio State will roll this year and would be more likely to be derailed by internal injuries to either the offensive line or the quarterbacks. If I had to predict an outside villain, I'd be wary of a hot Quinn Ewers. But like that idea of really it's internal is where the villains lie. Biggest possible villains, the offensive line somehow not developing and the quarterback being subpar like last year. That's what Ian said. You're looking at internal villains here. And then Chris had a good, interesting answer which goes back to a show that we did before. Actually, we did it on KOTN and then talked about it here as well, which was the natty or bust idea. Oregon with Dylan Gabriel scares me, the new quarterback at Oregon. So does Penn State with their crowd and their run game. Michigan and the mental aspect of looming failure. Georgia and Texas as playoff teams are also very real. Texas is not talked about enough. But I would like to take issue with the natty or bust idea. How can we be natty or bust if we are not even the odds-on favorite to win it all? Georgia is. I also don't like the idea that you can't be natty or bust following a championship. Anyway, his point is like, to bring up natty or bust there, it's like, let's list all these teams, but then it's acknowledging this natty or bust conversation, maybe pushing it back against the natty or bust conversation, which I am simultaneously having, leading, and pushing back against the natty or bust conversation. Because I realize it's out there. If Denzel Burke is going to say it, I realize it's out there, even if I don't like it. So can that internal pressure, Bo really talks about this a lot on next week's show, the internal pressure of all of this, is that really the number one thing? And I think you could argue that it is, because on this list, I think it might be a little bit of a down year for college football. So Harbaugh and Saban gone, and I think the elite quarterbacks a cut below where they've been, which all means it's there for the taking. So really, is the greatest villain the villain within, as it is for all of us? Little philosophy at the end. Okay, when we come back, that's our list. Thanks to all the tech subscribers who contributed to it. Thanks for indulging me on running through the reasons that Ohio State has lost its 28 games that it's lost, other than 2011. Since 2005, we'll do a little bit of what you're watching, what you're eating, what you're thinking, and then get out of here on Kings of Columbus. All right, wrapping it up on Kings of Columbus, what you're watching, what you're eating, what you're thinking. So what you're watching, I talked about this on previous shows. I went to the Olympic swim trials last week on Saturday in Indianapolis. And it's something I had suggested to you guys to try to do. I saw some Ohio State swimmers there. I actually saw an Ohio State swimmer that had been in preschool with my older daughter before he moved to Texas. So it was like he was on the starting blocks, and we took a picture of my daughter like leaning her head, and it's like, hey, you guys were in the same preschool when you were 4. If you went on my suggestion, I'm not going to apologize, but it's not what I thought it would be. So the bottom line is, like, there were a gazillion tickets available because they held it in Lucas Oil Stadium. And when I had gone previously in 2012, it was in Omaha in a swimming venue, which is like a 13 or 14,000 seat. And I saw something, I think like Lucas Oil, which is where they have the Big Ten title game, where they have a Super Bowl, where they have the national championship game, where the Colts play. I think they seated like 30 or 35 for swimming. So they just put an overlay of a pool over the football field. And like they had a thing where people were coming up out of the ground. So it was like 8 foot high, maybe 8 feet higher than the football field. And they just put a pool in. So the pool was fine. But the juice, it wasn't as juicy as when I saw it in an actual swimming venue. So I'm very curious what they do down the road with this. It had been in Omaha for like 4 straight years. It had been in Indy before, but like an actual swim venue in Indy. They're going to do the 2028 Olympics in LA. They're going to do the swimming in SoFi Stadium, in the football stadium for the actual Olympics. I don't know that they've announced what they're going to do for the trials, whether they will just do the trials in SoFi Stadium also as like a test run. But I got to tell you, swimming in a football stadium is not as good as swimming in a swimming venue. So more people could get in, but it's sort of this constant idea of, would you rather have a 13,000 seat venue that's full or a 30,000 seat venue that has 17,000 people in it? Because when I went on Ticketmaster to get tickets like 3 days before the event, I was like, oh, I hope we can get tickets. And there were thousands of tickets available. It was crazy. So it was cool. We went to the prelims on Saturday morning, which kind of just felt like a high school swim meet in a gigantic stadium. And then we went to the finals on Saturday night. We saw Katie Ledecky swim. That was awesome. And they do a really good job with the show of like introducing everybody and the medal ceremonies for the top 2 who qualify and that kind of thing. So I would recommend it. If you like the Olympics, it's the patriotic vibe. They have all kinds of swag with USA on it and stuff. Like, if you think you'll never get to an Olympics, which is very hard to get to an Olympics, super expensive and it's crowded and crazy and all that, it gives you the vibes. But I also would maybe recommend to the Olympic Committee that they go back to a swimming venue. And I'd rather sell out a swim venue than have a 60% full football stadium, even if more people can get in. So I don't know. It was fine. I'm glad we went. My daughter liked it. But I thought when I was there in 12, it felt like a gladiator pit to me. It felt like you were going to like fall out of the stand into the pool and everybody was going crazy. And it just didn't feel that way in a football stadium. So If you went, I would be curious at Doug Lesmerises on Twitter. Send me a text what you thought of it. And if you thought like, oh, Doug said this was going to be really cool and it was just fine, like I apologize because I'm really intrigued. I have not really read or heard like what people have said about it, but bigger is not always better. And they ran out of like all the good swag. Like when you go to the swimming trials, you just want stuff that says like USA Swimming Trials, Team USA. And they made too many shirts that said like the stadium's huge and so is the pool, like in giant letters on a t-shirt. And the idea of they were selling the idea, they branded the idea of like, we're in a football stadium. And actually like nobody cares about that because sports fans are in football stadiums all the time to watch football. What they care about is it's people trying to represent Team USA at the Olympics. So if you're going to brand it, don't brand how big your pool is. Brand the patriotism. People just want stuff that says Team USA, Olympic trials. They don't want stuff that says, I have a huge pool. Eating. Does P.F. Chang's slap every time or is it just me? I mean, we ate a P.F. Chang's in Indy because it's downtown. Does P.F. Chang's ever let you down? Now, I actually feel like P.F. Chang's is maybe like 20% not as good as it used to be, but they still have a giant horse statue and they still have tremendous lettuce wraps. And I was talking about this with my daughter. I want a filtered world. I figured this out because I was asking her, would you rather listen to a podcast? And maybe this is self-serving. This is incredibly self-serving. Would you rather listen to a podcast from athletes or from a schlub talking about athletes? And she was like, I guess a schlub. And I was like, I definitely vote for the schlub. And I was explaining that I like a filtered world. So like you drink filtered water, right? Like there's some people who like, I want to go to a mountain stream and stick my canteen in the stream. I don't want to go to a mountain stream. I want someone to like send the mountain stream into my fridge and I can put a filter on it, make sure there's no bugs in my water. And I filter the water. You drink filtered water, right? I want filtered Chinese food. I don't actually want to go to China and have like a 90-year-old person who with a 9-generation family recipe. I want the P.F. Chang's version of Chinese food. I want it filtered. It's why I like Disney World. I don't want, my daughter said, would you rather for the rest of your life, you can go to Europe whenever you want, but you can't ever go to Epcot, which has all the European countries, or you can go to Epcot, but you can't ever go to Europe. And I was like, I definitely would rather go to Epcot. I want the filter. I don't know why I admit this. It makes me sound like a plastic human, but I am a plastic human. So P.F. Chang's embodies that. P.F. Chang's is like the Disneyfication of ethnic food. And like, it's like stuff for the masses, right? Everyone's like, oh, this is for the masses. I'm the mass. I'm the singular mass. I'm the dumbed down version of the world that corporate America is selling to, and I'm gobbling it up. Give me a filter. So like for an athlete, but I actually do think like people, there's reality, and then there's the perception of reality. But actually, the perception is a reality in its own way. So there's what an athlete does, and the athlete says, like, I did this. And it's like, well, you did that, and this is your view of it, but I observed you doing it, and this is my view of it. And my view of what you did might not be the same of what you did. So I'll interview you about it and ask you about it, but I maybe don't only want your view of it. Even though your view is the real view, I want the filter. Because the filter can shift things. Sometimes the filter can make things better. But sometimes the filter provides its own version of reality. So eat P.F. Chang's lettuce wraps and listen to schlubs talk about sports. That was like a 2-minute encapsulation of my entire existence. If you're like, what's up with this Doug guy playing that? That was it. Thinking. Sometimes I wonder if I'm not cut out for this. I don't think you have to do hot takes. I can't get fired up because of video game rankings about college football. There's a lot of content out there about college football video game rankings, and the video game is coming out with the 25 best stadiums. Now the video game is ranking the best offenses. It's just so odd to me because I just set a filter. I don't want that filter because the reality is right there. How good is this offense? So now how loud is this stadium? It's right there. We experience it and we all have our opinions on it. But to be angry at a video games company of their digital world experience based on a reality, it's like now you're mad about a thing that's removed from I can't explain it. We're just not going to do a lot of video game content here where it's like the video game says this. Do you think the video game is right or wrong? Because to me, the point of the video game is playing the video game. And I know the rankings matter, and maybe this makes me sound old, but I'm here for it. I'm here for the video game. And I understand how many people are so excited that EA Sports College Football is back. And I'm glad it's back, and I'm glad players are getting paid, and I'm glad that fans can play that game. I can't do summer content on like how dare this video game rank this way. I apologize. I would rather do my own rankings than have you yell at me, than have me yell at the video games. Or I would rather yell at a human face that did their own rankings and he or she, I disagree with what they said. I don't want to disagree with the video game. So if you can explain why I should disagree with a video game and why you want that content, I'll give it to you. I can't. No, I won't. I can't do it. I can't do it. Bill will give it to you. I can't do it. Oh, I can't believe the video game had Utah's stadium too low. Whatever. I just want to run a trick play with my thumbs. I want to run a trick play with my thumbs. All right, that's it for this show. Back next week. Can Ohio State be America's team? That will be the show next week on Kings of Columbus. We will look back on the Big Ten West on Kings of the North. We'll take a little break, and then guess what? I'm going to be in Vegas. I'm going to Big 12 Media Days. We'll be doing that on Kings of the North, and then Big 10 Media Days is right around the corner at the end of July. So we appreciate so much you guys giving us time in your busy lives to chat up college football. We're so grateful that like someone pays us to do this. It's practically a miracle. So for our great producer, Mike Urostowski, who always makes us look good and sound good, I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of Columbus.